A landmark ruling in Ecuador has placed the spotlight on the country's ongoing security crisis and the role of the military in civilian policing. A court in Ecuador has sentenced 11 Air Force personnel to lengthy prison terms over the disappearance of 4 Afro-Ecuadorian boys in Guayaquil, the nation's largest city. The boys, aged between 11 and 15, became the center of national outrage last year after their abduction during a security operation in the southern neighborhoods of the city. Dubbed the Guayaquil Four, their case has highlighted the human cost of Ecuador's aggressive security policy, which was intensified under President Daniel Noboa. Since declaring a state of internal armed conflict 2 years ago, Noboa has relied heavily on the armed forces to combat drug trafficking and organized crime, deploying troops on street patrols traditionally handled by the police. The court's decision marks one of the most severe examples of accountability for human rights violations in Ecuador in recent years, and it has drawn international attention to the challenges faced by minority communities in the country. The events unfolded on December 8th of the previous year, when Stephen Medina, aged 11, Nehemias Arboleda, 14, and brothers Josue and Ismael Arroyo, aged 14 and 15, were returning home from a football match in Las Malvinas, an underprivileged neighborhood in southern Guayaquil. According to court records and eyewitness reports, the boys were stopped by Air Force personnel who were patrolling the streets at the time. Families had no information about the children for more than 2 weeks, heightening public concern and triggering local protests. The investigation culminated on Christmas Eve, when charred bodies of the 4 boys were discovered approximately 25 miles from the location of their abduction. Forensic examinations revealed that each of the boys had suffered gunshot wounds to the head and back, and their bodies were subsequently burned and dismembered. The severity of the crime, combined with the young age of the victims, generated widespread outrage both within Ecuador and internationally, prompting calls for greater accountability and reforms in military engagement in civilian areas. The court in Guayaquil delivered its verdict after months of investigation and trial proceedings. 11 Air Force personnel were sentenced to 34 years and 8 months in prison for their roles in the forced disappearance of the boys. A separate group of 5 servicemen who had confessed and cooperated with the investigation received reduced sentences of 2 years and 6 months. One individual was acquitted due to insufficient evidence linking him to the events. Presiding Judge Giovanni Suarez, joined by 2 additional judges, emphasized that the cruelty inflicted upon the minors had been conclusively established during the trial. While the trial primarily addressed the crime of forced disappearance, the public prosecutor's office has indicated that a separate investigation into kidnapping resulting in death remains ongoing. The verdict underscores the judiciary's focus on accountability for the handling of civilians by military forces during security operations, especially when deployed in urban environments where children and vulnerable populations may be exposed to risk. Evidence presented during the trial included CCTV footage capturing the moment the boys were forcibly taken and assaulted by the Air Force personnel. Witness statements corroborated the timeline, showing the boys being placed into vehicles and transported away from their neighborhood. Some of the servicemen provided detailed confessions describing their involvement in the abduction and mistreatment of the boys. One soldier, Christian Eduardo A.Q., explained that many personnel deployed on street patrols were untrained for such operations. He revealed that he had previously worked in air traffic control and weather observation at control towers in Quito and had received no operational training in human rights or public security. His testimony highlighted that soldiers were often sent into civilian areas due to staff shortages and the administration's reliance on the armed forces for internal policing. This line of evidence provided context to the court's assessment of responsibility, while also illustrating the structural challenges facing Ecuador's security apparatus. The trial also brought to light the particular vulnerability of Afro-Ecuadorian communities to human rights abuses. Reports indicated that after the boys' abduction, they were subjected to racialized insults and violent physical abuse, including punches, kicks, and blows from belts and gun barrels. The boys were stripped naked and abandoned far from home in an unfamiliar and high-crime area. At least one of the victims managed to contact his father for help, but by the time the father arrived, the boys had already been taken from the location. The court considered the abandonment in a dangerous environment to be a direct factor contributing to the boys' deaths. This aspect of the case has raised broader questions about systemic discrimination, the protection of minority communities, and the obligations of security forces to respect human rights while executing operations. The Ecuadorian government, including President Noboa and Defense Minister Giancarlo Lofredo, initially denied military involvement in the deaths, attributing the tragedy to criminal groups operating in the area. However, the emergence of video evidence and confessions during the trial contradicted these statements. While the defense teams argued that those involved should not be held responsible for the actual killings, citing the possibility that the boys may have been killed by local criminals after being abandoned, the court focused on the forced disappearance and the circumstances created by the military's actions. The case has become emblematic of tensions between an aggressive security strategy and the protection of civilians, illustrating the challenges faced by governments that deploy armed forces in roles traditionally managed by police forces. The Guayaquil Four case has resonated beyond Ecuador's borders, highlighting the intersection of human rights, military oversight, and minority protection in Latin America. By holding the 11 Air Force personnel accountable for decades-long sentences, the judiciary has signaled that crimes committed during internal security operations will not go unpunished. The case also underscores the necessity for proper training, accountability mechanisms, and civilian oversight when military personnel are deployed in urban environments. It has sparked public debate on the use of armed forces for domestic security, the responsibilities of state actors in protecting vulnerable populations, and the importance of integrating human rights education into security protocols. Observers have noted that similar challenges exist across the region, where militarized anti-crime strategies must be balanced against civil liberties and ethical policing standards. While the court's verdict provides a measure of justice for the families of Stephen Medina, Nehemias Saul Arboleda, Josue Arroyo, and Ismael Arroyo, questions remain about the precise circumstances of their deaths. The investigation into kidnapping resulting in death continues, and authorities are examining whether additional actors or criminal elements may have contributed to the fatalities after the boys were abandoned. Beyond the immediate legal outcomes, the case has catalyzed discussions about military deployment, racial equity, and the protection of minors during security operations. For many Ecuadorians, the ruling represents both a warning and a promise that even within the context of a national security crisis, the judiciary will uphold human rights and pursue accountability. As the country continues to navigate the complex realities of crime, security, and justice, the Guayaquil Four case will likely remain a touchstone for future policies and reforms in Ecuador's approach to internal security.